Growing up, we had an audio recording in my house of a certain comedian doing a routine about Noah's Ark. It remains one of my favorite stand-up routines because the comedian imagines Noah actually responding like any of us would. The voice comes from heaven, "Noah, I want you to build an ark." "You want me to build a what? Who is this?" The voice comes back, "This is God. I want you to build an ark." "Right. Who is this really?" "I want you to build it 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits. "Right. What's a cubit?" If we were to hear a voice calling from heaven, telling us to build an ark, at first we would probably try to dismiss it, and then we would probably go see a doctor. It's the same way that I feel about these disciples here in our story from the Gospel of Luke this morning. The actual call part of the story is just about a verse and a half. It says, "Then Jesus said to Simon, 'Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching people.' And when they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him." From now on, you will be catching people. And that was it. They left everything. They left their boats, they left their nets, all those fish they had just caught, their homes, and their families. You have to think that there might have been some discussion of the practical among the disciples, but we don't get any of that. Like Noah, the disciples simply get to work without any questions and any arguments. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of examples of those who are called by God in the Bible and do put up a little bit of a fight. Jonah, of course, is the classic example. He had to be swallowed by a whale before he did what God told him to do. But while Jonah simply didn't like the people of Nineveh, other prophets seemed to have good reason for not doing what God had called them to do. Listen to part of this conversation between God and Moses. "But Moses said to the Lord, 'O my Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now, that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue.' Then the Lord said to him, 'What gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to speak.' But Moses responded and said, 'O my Lord, please send someone else.'" When Isaiah had his incredible vision in the throne room, in the vision itself, Isaiah said this, "Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then a seraph flew and touched his lips with a burning coal and declared him to be forgiven. And then Isaiah chapter 6 verse 8 says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?' And I said, 'Here am I, send me.'" We don't really take that kind of call all that seriously anymore, it seems. Most often I hear the word call from my children about a certain restaurant is calling, or the mall is calling, or at the end of a long day my pillow is calling. But in our story for this morning, Peter and James and John witness the miracle of the fish, the abundance of what God had done for them. And that moves Peter to follow in Moses' footsteps and to fall upon his knees and declare himself unworthy. He said, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Jesus responds very simply, of course, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." Jesus knew that what was holding Peter back from a lifetime of faithful discipleship was his fear. Now, here in the church, we do take the idea of call extraordinarily serious, not because we think that God is going to tell us to build an ark or because a seraph might fly and touch our lips with burning coal, but that could happen, but rather because we believe that God has a purpose for all of us collectively and for each of us individually. In a statement of faith from 1962, the Presbyterian Church said this: "Each Christian is called to be a servant of God in all of life, so that we must seek God's will for the work we do and for the manner in which we do it. Christian vocation may be found in any work where our own abilities and interests best meet the legitimate needs of God's world." That is my prayer for Oakley Lane this morning, and for Kinsley and for Colton, that in life they may seek God's will for the work they do and for the manner in which they do it, and that their abilities and their interests best meet the legitimate needs of God's world. It's really a fair question for any of us to ask ourselves. Are we doing God's will? Are we using our abilities and our interests to legitimately try to do something to meet the needs of God's people in this world? Sometimes we do. Sometimes we do collectively. Sometimes we do individually. Sometimes we fall short because we're too busy. But it's also important to look around us in the world and find people who are doing what it takes to meet the needs of God's people. Perhaps we look at institutions around the world that are really good at this type of work. Perhaps this morning we look for a moment at USAID. To people who sign up to give their life to foreign service. People who use their intelligence and compassion to try to meet the literal needs of God's people, where the top earners earn less than 6 figures. Just for a bit of perspective this morning, since it is Super Bowl Sunday, thought I'd just mention that a 30-second ad in the Super Bowl tonight cost $8 million. Tonight, in an effort to sell people chips and beer and cars, companies will collectively spend around $700 million, which is nothing compared to the expected gambling total for tonight, which is around $1.4 billion with a B. Add those two numbers together. Just in ads and gambling tonight, you're over $2 billion for tonight's football game, which doesn't include any of the players' salaries, of course, which is just a little bit higher than workers at USAID. We take the idea of call very seriously in the church. And we work hard to clear away anything that might keep us from hearing and responding to God's call. In fact, that's one aspect of pretty much everything that we do in this place, from Christian education to mission to worship. We seek to put ourselves in a position to be hearers of the word and doers of the word. And far too often, the only reason that we don't connect the hearing and the doing is because of that little thing called fear. Fear of the repercussions, fear of the cost, fear of ridicule or of fight, fear of failure, because we simply do not believe that we are worthy to hear God's call. But today, just like Peter did all those years ago, we hear a very simple yet profound statement that Jesus says to people throughout the Gospels, over and over again: do not be afraid. If not me, who? If not now, when? And to ask the question as to the question of worthy, I want you to take just a moment this morning and think about Oakley Lane. She hasn't done anything yet. She hasn't earned anything yet. She did cry while I tried to baptize her, so that goes in the negative column. But she really hasn't had much of an opportunity to choose between good and evil in this life. And yet, God has claimed her. God has sealed her. God has called her beloved. God has named her as worthy of receiving a call, just as God has done for each and every one of us. Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Amen.